Many Phillies fans have expressed their frustrations about the lack of moves that were done at the MLB trade deadline. We got a recent report indicating they were very close on a deal regarding White Sox pitcher Garrett Crochet. I want to break down what exactly happened, the signs that are kind of giving off from Crochet and his camp that had me skeptical and I think was the right reason not to go all in for this Phillies team, as well as a look at what kind of the situation from the pitching staff is at this point. Now, before I dive fully into it, I do want to make sure you guys are smashing that subscribe button here. That at this point in time, 92.2% of you guys listening to these videos have not subscribed to the channel just yet. I want to get this Phillies Digest family fully growing, as I still believe in this team and think they're getting back on the right path, although a frustrating loss at the hands of the Nationals most recently, where, Rob Thomson just pinch hit Bryce Harper. Just give the man a chance. I don't care that it's off day. But regardless, I do want to get back to the topic of this video. I want to start out with this report that we get here saying that in the final 24 hours of the trade deadlines, the Phillies made an offer for starting pitcher Garrett Crochet that the White Sox considered, quote, attractive, per Ken Rosenthal. And to give a little more meat on that here, we got the report that left-hander Garrett Crochet's reported refusal to pitch in the playoffs without a contract extension did not stop teams from trying to acquire him before the trade deadline. In the final 24 hours, both the Los Angeles Dodgers and Philadelphia Phillies made offers for Crochet that the White Sox considered attractive, according to sources briefed on the discussion. And in the final hour, the Dodgers were still talking to the White Sox about a possible deal. So obviously, the Phillies were not the only team that were interested here. Both the Dodgers and Phillies, probably the two biggest threats to win the National League at this point in time. We know that when push comes to shove, those are the big dogs that it will come down to. But you're kind of seeing the first weirdness with Crochet in this initial tweet, that his refusal to pitch in the playoffs without a contract extension. Now, for what it's worth, this is still a very young player in the early part of his career, making just $800,000 for this season and is looking for a contract extension. He's still under club control for 2 more seasons after this. This is a player that me and Luke talked quite a bit about leading up to the trade deadline and ultimately landed on a player that I did not feel was the need. And Crochet himself kind of expressed his thoughts on the subject. So to get it directly from his mouth as far as his desire to remain a starting pitcher, he says, quote, kind of like I said, about the innings that I had last year. I think that anybody can understand where I'm coming from in that regard, Crochet said. I think it may have come across as greedy to some, but I think those in the industry realize that it's logical to have that line of thinking. Whether or not teams understood his line of thinking, he remains on the White Sox past the MLB trade deadline. Now, he's faced with another unresolved demand that he made ahead of the trade deadline, his workload. Crochet wants to remain a starter. He told NBC Sports Chicago Chuck Garland in March that he prefers the 5-day routine of being a starter. He doesn't believe the standby everyday workload of a bullpen reliever is efficient for him. Still, the White Sox want to taper and manage his workload for the rest of the season that got away from them early on. And while the left-hander is opposed to that decision, he'd rather just go out there and throw. Quote, whether a workload conversation happens at some point, I imagine I'll be involved in that, Crochet said. At the same time, I'd rather not be at the forefront of making that call. I want to go out there and pitch, and whenever I'm done, take the ball from me. So in some regard, I respect his mentality that I just want to play ball, I just want to go. On the other hand, I think he's being pretty unrealistic with this. Like, the bottom line is the White Sox season has been lost for months at this point. And I'll also note Luis Robert, who we talked plenty bit and seemed to be the star that was destined to be traded at the trade deadline, was not traded and has been brutal for the second half of the season. So glad there was not this massive package deal for Crochet and Robert, as we kind of were hoping or talked about leading up to that point. A lot of speculation in those regard. But with Crochet specifically, he'd been pretty open leading up to that point that he wanted to remain a starter following the trade deadline, regardless of the situation, whether it was with the White Sox, whether it was on a contender. And that was something that worried me, that I think the ideal pitcher the Phillies could have added, sort of like, and this guy did not pan out last year, but the same kind of mindset of a Michael Lorenzen, that a guy could step in and pitch starting caliber innings or starting opportunities for this team and then shift to the bullpen when the team needs it. Now, granted, Lorenzen proved not to be good enough for what that team needed or the role that he was looked in, but that archetype of player is what I had my eyes on. Now, ultimately, the trade deadline came and went, and the Phillies did not add a starting pitcher. They did add 2 in the bullpen in Tanner Banks and Carlos Estevez, and I think that is the right call overall. And just one more quick thing on Crochet here. Do want to acknowledge his full stats overall, that he's pitched more seasons or more innings this year than any other season combined. And he is just 25 years old, still a lot lot of years on his arms, and to give his full stats on this season in particular, in 25 games, he's gone 124.2 innings, just 16 home runs allowed, 176 strikeouts, and just 103 hits, a 3.61 ERA, and a whip of just over 1 here. He's having a really good year. He was an all-star for a reason, and a guy that I do think is in the early part of what should be a very successful career for the pitcher. But the bottom line is, you're kind of in purgatory with the White Sox, and I do think he cost himself a real opportunity of impacting a winner by kind of having the weirdness and strangeness attached to his name. I know you got to put yourself first. This is a business at the end of the day, and he's clearly trying to put himself in the best position to get a major payday, but I do think that he has ruffled a couple feathers in a way that he could have done without in the process. Now, to talk about this Phillies team, I understand the reason for not being dead set on bringing in a starting pitcher. And to pull up their list of pitchers as a whole, you can see the starters lined up. There is Zack Wheeler, there is Aaron Nola, there is Christopher Sanchez, fresh off his complete game, Taijuan Walker, and that's kind of Ranger Suarez is eventually returning to that fifth starting role. That is going to be the rotation for the foreseeable future for leading into that plan. Now, the biggest question mark here is obviously Taijuan Walker. He's a guy who certainly has not pitched up to what his contract has commanded since coming to the Phillies here, and a guy who, while he hasn't been as bad as sometimes I think he's talked about, I have very little optimism for on the nights in which he is stepping on the hill. So far this season, in the 57 innings that he has pitched, allowed 13 home runs. That's a lot there. 62 hits. That's 9.8 hits per 9 innings there. His ERA sitting at 5.6. Now, granted, there is the Aaron Nolas of the world and the Zack Wheelers of the world who have still been very good. I'm pretty optimistic about Ranger now being freshly, revived and having some time to rest up, some just wear and tear off the arm, and hopefully come in for a convincing second half of the season after he started so elite for the first half of the year. Then you did see a little bit of a fall off there. Christopher Sanchez seems to have regained form after he started out so hot and then had kind of a dip in his production as well. I do think that the most recent game, in which was that complete game in just 99 pitches, which is absurd stuff there, that was the best version of Christopher Sanchez. That when he's dealing, he's not a guy that's going to be striking out a ton of batters or you're not touching his pitches. He's just going to be super in control. That he's forcing groundouts. He's having hitters at the plate being super ahead of his pitches, that it is his sinker and his changeup are his calling cards as a pitcher. But I think from the Phillies' perspective, they felt confident in that they know what they have in Wheeler and Nola. It does not get much better than that from a top two of a starting rotation right there. Those are their horses that they're going to rely on. Then looking beyond that, that third pitching spot from a playoff standpoint is probably going to come down to either Ranger or Sanchez. And I honestly think at this point, the way that he's pitching, if things continue, that Sanchez probably has the inside track on keeping that job. And I more so think that because Ranger's much more malleable in what you can do with him as a pitcher, that we've seen him pitch out of the bullpen before. We've seen him pitch some high leverage situations for this Phillies team in the playoffs. And he is a guy who you certainly can't rattle at him. You can't rattle him. He has every bit the belief in himself, and regardless of how large the moment is, he's approaching it the exact same way as if he's throwing batting practice. That's just who he is as a player, and it's something that, impacts him very positively in all regards. So it would not shock me. But if that does not happen, then we are talking about Ranger Suarez as that number 3, and that's still a pretty good trio right there. And there's a lot of bullpen arms that we should feel fairly comfortable about. I would argue that this is probably the most impressive bullpen that we have seen during this era of Phillies baseball, at least during the Bryce Harper, during this playoff push, because we are talking about the Jeff Hoffmans of the world, who hasn't quite been himself lately, but I do think is getting back to it. Matt Strahm, who overall has been excellent this season. Max Lazar is an interesting one that I'm going to dive deeper into. Don't want to hype him up too much for now, but I do like what I'm seeing and would not shock me if he gets an opportunity. Orion Kirkring is a guy who's still getting his act together a little bit, but overall a really solid option. Tyler Gilbert, who was freshly called up and why Tyler Phillips was sent down in the first place. Estevez, who, again, has had his ups and downs. I would say all these guys have kind of gone through this to this point. When you look at the peak of what each of these players are, and I'll include Tanner Banks and Jose Alvarado in that same conversation, you feel really good about what they bring to this Phillies team. So overall, while it is frustrating that they weren't able to get that deal into the end zone and accomplish it to add another talented arm to this Phillies team, I do understand why Dave Dombrowski's head was at, and ultimately we do have to acknowledge how significant that the seller's market it was at the trade deadline, that we were seeing some ludicrous prices, prospects being commanded for players that straight up aren't as excellent as you would like them to be for that type of price point. So in Dave Dombrowski, we trust to this point. Hopefully there is enough talent on this roster for this Phillies team to get it done. If we're falling up short at the end of the playoffs, it's not because we're one Garrett Crochet away. It is because we are Bryce Harper not playing his best, JT Realmuto not hitting the ball, Trey Turner not playing like Trey Turner. That is going to be the driving force of this Phillies team, and it's going to come down to that, whether or not this team does succeed or not. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. What are your thoughts on Garrett Crochet? Was that a big miss from Dave Dombrowski? Would that have been a difference maker to this Phillies team? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And once again, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button. Let's keep this Phillies Digest family growing. So drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll be talking to you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.